Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Charles Hokanson, president of the Alliance for School Choice. The Alliance is the nation's largest nonprofit that seeks to advance the spread of private school choice, particularly for low-income students around the country. And we do that primarily through two vehicles, vouchers, which the other panel is going to be covering, and tax credits. And so this morning we're going to be talking about corporate and individual individual scholarship tax credit programs as a vehicle for helping lower income, in particular, students be able to afford a quality education. And I wanted to first of all go through what are these programs, show you where they are, and then we have the rest of our panelists who are going to talk about different aspects of implementation, how they're actually working in a couple particular states, and how they can lead to cost savings as well for the state. So first of all, what are the scholarships tax credit programs? All of this information is also included in a handout that you have in front of you. But there are currently 6 states that offer corporate and or individual tax credit programs. Through these programs, corporations or individuals are able to donate to organizations, nonprofit organizations, that provide scholarships to students to attend the private schools. In most cases, the states are requiring the organizations to provide scholarships only to children in low-income families, and in return, the corporations and the scholarships who are donating the money to the nonprofits receive state income tax credits for their donations. This current school year that just concluded, we had about 95,830 students benefiting from the 6 programs that were operating in 5 states: Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. And those scholarship granting organizations had received a total of about $200 million in donations from the corporations and the individuals who were donating to the programs. Also, in May 2008, we had a big victory for the school choice movement in Georgia. Georgia became the 6th state to have a tax credit program, and they created a $50 million corporate and individual tax credit program. Very sizable program. It's equal to the size of Florida when it first got started. And that will be starting to operate in September. So very quickly, just to give you a sense of what these programs look like, because there is a little variety, Arizona has 2 scholarship programs: an individual school tuition program and a corporate school tuition program. In the individual school program, they can receive tax credits for donations up to $500 or $1,000 per couple to school tuition organizations. And the corporate program allows companies to receive dollar-for-dollar tax credits for donations. In Florida, there is the Corporate Tax Credit Scholarship Program. It's also known popularly as the Step Up for Students. It's allowing corporations to receive a dollar-for-dollar tax credit of up to 75% of their state income tax liability for donations made to the SFO, the Scholarship Funding Organization. And then in Georgia, they just created the Corporate and Individual Scholarship Tax Credit Program. Corporations can get a 100% tax credit for donations, up to 75% of their total state tax liability, to organizations that grant the scholarships. Individuals can donate $1,000 or $2,500 per couple to these organizations, and they receive 100% tax credit. You'll see that there's some common themes, but also some variation from state to state. Iowa has an individual school tuition organization tax credit program, and it allows individual taxpayers to receive a tax credit of up to 65%, so it's a little bit on the lower end in Iowa for donations to school tuition organizations. Pennsylvania has one of the largest programs in the country. It provides corporations with a 75% tax credit for a 1-year donation to a scholarship organization or an educational improvement organization which can benefit the public schools, and a 90% tax credit for a 2-year donation. Corporations can donate up to $200,000 per year of their tax liability. And then finally, in Rhode Island, there's a corporate scholarship tax credit program providing corporations with tax credits on a first-come, first-served basis. Like Pennsylvania, they had a 1-year and a 2-year mechanism, so that if you corporations donate for 1 year, they receive a 75% tax credit, but if they commit to 2 years, they get the extra bonus of a 90% tax credit. So what are the benefits of these tax credit programs? You'll hear a little bit about this from the other panelists. But rather than being operated by the government like a voucher program, these scholarship programs are operated by nonprofit, tax-exempt scholarship granting organizations which use the contributions to essentially provide scholarships to low-income children. The money never actually goes into the state coffers. It's not appropriated. The tax credit scholarships don't originate from these appropriations. They're all private charitable contributions that go to nonprofits that have been approved to essentially participate in the program. So they're not funded by the public agencies. States, however, do monitor the organizations to ensure financial accountability, and the provisions range from state to state. This last chart I'm not going to go through, but I wanted to make sure that, because it's very difficult to see up there, but you do have it in front of you. It has some things in it, including the number of scholarships around the country for each of these programs. What's the average scholarship amount? You'll see that it varies greatly from state to state. Some states provide a very wide range of scholarships. They're highest in Florida and Rhode Island. The annual tax credit cap. Most states cap the number of donations that can be given either by corporations or individuals to the program. The largest in the country is Florida. And Florida, it's up here as having an $88 million tax cap, but the Florida legislature, thanks in great part to John Kirtley, just passed a $30 million expansion. So it is on the governor's desk, and we're expecting in the next 10 days for Governor Christ to essentially approve the $30 million expansion, and then that will be a $118 million cap here in Florida. So that's sort of an overview of the programs. You can get a sense of the different flavor of what they look like in the states. The Alliance for School Choice is an organization that helps create these opportunities by working with local C3 organizations, and our sister organization, the Advocates for School Choice, gets involved in the C4 advocacy work, helping local C4s pass this legislation. We're experts on bill design, and I wanted to make sure that on our website we have model legislation. This is our School Choice Yearbook 2006. It includes model bills. So if you're in a state that wants to try to create one of these programs, these bills have been thoroughly gone through and vetted by the Institute for Justice, nonprofit public interest law firm, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Alliance for School Choice, and the Friedman Foundation as being good policy design to start you off on how to do a tax credit program of various types. And I just wanted to make sure that you were aware of two publications. One is that School Choice Yearbook. The latest version, School Choice Yearbook 2007, looks like this. You should have received one on your desk. And also the ABCs of School Choice, which is put out by our partner organization, the Friedman Foundation for Alliance, the Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. It's another publication that goes through all the different types of programs that are operating around the country. With that, I just want to sort of close out this overview and move on to our first presenter, which is John Kirtley, who happens to serve as Vice Chairman of the Alliance and Advocates for School Choice and President of Florida Pride.
Thank you. Good morning. Let me try to get my thing up here if I can find it. Bear with me. There we go. Okay. I want to make sure I don't repeat what Charles has gone over, and also not steal any thunder for what Matt's or others are going to say, so I'll go through some of this very quickly. First, I'm so pleased to be here, and I want to thank Governor Bush and Josh and Patricia and everybody from the foundation for inviting me here. It is such an honor to be at this great gathering, so thank you very much for the opportunity. As Charles mentioned, ours is just a corporate tax credit. We don't have individual income taxes in Florida, never will. Families must qualify for the free reduced lunch, and they can't already be in private school to be in our program. And that was done for budgetary reasons. We can cover that later if we have time. Maximum scholarship of just under $4,000 by law. And we also have, for tuition that is, we also have scholarships to take kids from one public school to an out-of-district public school. We only have a handful of those because there isn't a great demand for those in the state. We already talked about the caps. We currently have 20,000 children on the program. We'll have 25,000 at least this coming fall. 40% are African American and 30% are Hispanic. The average household income of those families is $24,000 for a family of four. Interestingly, that is $12,000 below the free or reduced lunch standard. And they actually, I don't have this on here, but it's very important. They attend just over 800 private schools in the state. And they have average tuition of about $5,000. So what that means is the family is coming out of pocket on average about $1,000 per kid, which is a tremendous sacrifice for families of this income level. Yesterday I heard somebody say, hey, the key to education reform is competition through public charters. And I'm a huge advocate of charter schools. But I will tell you that if you just take an attitude of we're only going to push charter schools, you are missing a huge inventory of existing schools that are right there to serve low-income families. We have 800 schools serving these kids in the state of Florida. Most of them are in low-income areas. That's a multiple of them are charter schools we have. So just I want you to think about that. This chart, I don't know if you can see it, but I put this up here because I want to just raise the topic, and maybe we can talk about it in Q&A. The design of a tax credit program will dictate the effect, the public policy effect that it will have. Will your tax credit program, will its primary purpose be, one, to help families on the margin with a small amount keep their kids in private school? Or will it, two, perhaps, help all taxpayers, regardless of household income, not pay twice for K-12 education? Or three, will it help poor families that could not otherwise afford it have the chance to attend a school outside the public system? The design of your program will dictate which way that goes. As you can see here, our average scholarship is much, much higher than Pennsylvania's, and actually more than double than Arizona. Our average household income is quite low. There is no means testing for the individual program in Arizona. I don't think they have statistics, maybe I'm wrong on that, about Pennsylvania. Maybe you guys could help me with that. But I know that the income level is much, much higher. But it's an important policy topic, and it actually affects the politics as well. Now, you might say, well, John, why only 3 scholarship organizations in your state? That's so strange. And why is the administrative cost allowance, in other words, how much of the money that you raise from companies can you keep to actually run the program? Why is it so low in Florida as compared to the other 2 states? It has to do with our political environment. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's very, very important. You've heard here in the last day and a half the brave and aggressive reforms that Governor Bush put forth when he first came into office in 1999. I mean, he went further than any governor ever has in trying to reform public education. When you do that, there is going to be pushback. You will have pushback from the status quo. You will have pushback, in our case, in our state, from the press, and it will be very, very strong. And you have to understand that we actually started this program, our tax credit program, right in the middle of that buzzsaw. Governor Bush had been in office for 3 years when we passed the program. He was up for re-election when we were first starting to enroll kids in this program. And we were right in the middle of a very, very pitched political battle. The opponent to Governor Bush, his main platform that he ran on was to repeal all of Governor Bush's education reforms. And he actually made the repeal of our tax credit program his #1 campaign priority. He was out every day talking about, I'm going to get rid of this corporate voucher program. And you know, in the same environment, when we first were starting to sign up companies, we had a local teachers union actually do a protest against one of our early companies that signed up. If we have time, I'll talk about that in Q&A if you're interested. Our press has been relentlessly against the idea of school choice. And this became a fever pitch in 2003. Why is this? We can talk about that in Q&A if we have time. Maybe it has to do with our polarized political environment. It has to do with, again, the reforms that Governor Bush was pushing for. But not a week passed when there wasn't an anti-school choice editorial and an editorial against this program. These are some of the kinder titles that we had from editorials during that time period. And I have friends from other parts of the country who were just astounded by the press treatment of choice in the state. I don't know if anybody here from D.C., Washington, D.C.? Washington Post editorializes in favor of the voucher program in D.C. Denver Post, same thing. Not the case here. We have one paper in the entire state out of 15 that is in favor of school choice, somewhat of an unusual environment. We had some self-inflicted wounds here in our state. We had one SFO, or scholarship organization, in Ocala commit fraud. It was a guy that had his own school, and he set up a scholarship program for his own school, raised about $200,000, and paid other bills with that money and didn't give scholarships. That's bad news. And to their credit, an aggressive newspaper uncovered that story, headlines across the state. That prompted the state CFO to do an investigation, a financial investigation of all the scholarship programs in the state. Again, headlines across the state. Our response to that, certain of the scholarship programs banded together and said, hey, we already have very high fiscal accountability. These are the standards that we use. We worked with the governor's office and Patricia Levesque in the governor's office, and we actually passed accountability legislation to increase the fiscal accountability for the program. And I will tell you, if we had not done that, this program and perhaps school choice would not have survived in our state. And I know it's hard for others, maybe from Arizona or Pennsylvania, to even imagine an environment like that, but that is the environment in which we live. Some of the things that we have to do that are very different from other states, very high auditing standards that the SFOs have to follow and submit to the state. We have to verify every single household income every single year. A scholarship program cannot be dedicated to one or two schools. It has to be truly portable. And finally, a scholarship program cannot discriminate on any basis, even religion. The schools actually, to enroll and serve kids in this program, have to prove to the state that they are in compliance with all the private school laws that deal with private schools, and there are quite a few. And then finally, and probably one of the most important things, every kid in this program has to take either the state assessment test, or it's called the FCAT in our state, or a nationally recognized norm reference test like the Stanford 10 or the Iowa Basic Skills. And then every year those scores have to be reported to the University of Florida, independent third-party research entity, and they will do a longitudinal study on the learning gains of those children. Again, if we had not imposed this, I do not think we would have survived politically. I want to move now to what I find to be the most fascinating part about the school choice movement and about tax credits, but about this issue in general, and that is the changing politics of school choice. In 2001, when we passed this bill, we passed it with one single Democrat in the entire legislature voting for the bill. Not a single member of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives voted for the bill. And we could spend all day on the reasons why that was, but what we have going for us here in Florida and across the country is that the constituents of these Democrats so powerfully want school choice, and they are so passionate about it. They could be mobilized, and we have done a lot of that in the last few years. We have connected the constituents with the people who represent them, and this is a great example of what I'm talking about. This is like 4 or 5 years ago. It's one of the first times we did this. This is a great guy. This is State Representative Terry Fields from Jacksonville. This is like in 2002 or 2003. We brought a whole bunch of his own constituents to his office, and they said, hey, why don't you support this tax credit program? And he said, well, it has to do with politics and all that. And they said, look, we don't really understand that. And then they said, well, where do you send your kid to school? And he said, well, you have to understand, my kid wasn't doing well in public school. He needed a different environment. And they said, yeah, we understand that. We get that. That's what we want. And to his credit, Fields said, I cannot be inconsistent between my public life and my private life. And he came out and supported the program. And that is a true, courageous politician who does the right thing. And I have been amazed that once you get the parents in front of the legislators, this can happen. And Charles is going to show a video a little bit later, but we have tried to demonstrate on a really symbolic basis the power of this issue. And just to give you an example, and he'll show it to you later, last year we put out a call to the parents on this tax credit program. We said, come to Tallahassee just to show how you feel about this program. Show your support. We had over 4,000 parents show up. Took the day off work. And they came from as far away as Miami. They slept on buses overnight and marched in Tallahassee. It was very moving. And this is having an effect. And just to give you some evidence of that, this year, as Charles mentioned, we passed a bill to increase the program by about 30%. And by the way, it was the worst budget year in recent history in Florida, so it wasn't the easiest time to pass a bill. And remember, when we passed the bill the first time, 2001, one Democrat in the entire legislature. This year, we got a majority of the Black caucus to vote for the bill. We got 100% of the Hispanic caucus to vote for the bill. We got 1/3 of all the Democrats in the legislature to vote for the bill. The first person to co-sponsor the bill in the Senate was Senator Al Lawson, a black Democrat from Tallahassee, the incoming leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate. In the House, the first person to co-sponsor the bill was Representative Frank Peterman, at the time the chairman of the Legislative Black Caucus. Progress is being made. And another example of the evidence of this progress, there are 3 SFOs now in our state. The most recent to join us is the nonprofit run by former Congresswoman Carrie Meek, who was the first black congressperson after Reconstruction in Florida, an icon of the Democratic Party in our state. She not only is supporting choice, she is administering the program, and that speaks volumes. When this vote occurred, I personally thought it was a very significant event, and I thought that everybody in the press would report upon it. Only one lone, brave reporter did in the whole state. Other people thought it was significant. The Wall Street Journal did. They actually wrote an editorial about it in May. But not a single editorial in our state, and only one small news story. But the Florida press, and I shouldn't pick on them, but I do, because they pick on me. They're going to have a hard time letting go of their stereotypes about this issue. And I'll just close by, I want to read you an actual editorial. This picture is from a different rally in '06. Governor Bush asked for parents to come and support the idea of school choice. This was the crowd. This is what it looked like. The press was there, including the Orlando Sentinel. I shouldn't pick on them, but I'm going to. 2 days later, the Orlando Sentinel had an editorial, and I'll read to you verbatim. These vouchers are popular with conservative Republican voters, as witnessed by the thousands of people who rallied at the Capitol last week. But they are not popular with Floridians. The desire to find a good school is not confined to party or to race or to income. Every parent wants this power, and these tax credit programs are a great way to give it to them. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Representative Steve Yarborough. Do it here? Sure.
Well, good morning. It's great to be here, and thank you, Charles. It's pretty generally well known that Arizona has a rich history in the school choice movement. Back in 1994, Arizona adopted a charter school law, but at the same time an open enrollment law for public district schools. And today, Arizona has approximately 500 charter schools and about 110,000 kids in those charter schools, and that makes about 10% of the total K-12 enrollment in Arizona. In 1997, the legislature passed, and then Governor Symington signed the individual scholarship tax credit law in Arizona, which was the first in the nation of that type. A number of folks worked hard to accomplish that. Perhaps the most significant or the catalyst was just a citizen, Trent Franks, who now, however, is a member of Congress. It's noteworthy to observe that in 1997 there was actually a companion tax credit that provided for donations to public schools for extracurricular activities. That was added to the bill at the time simply as a way to garner additional votes, but it's interesting to observe that the public school extracurricular activities tax credit in Arizona has vicariously served to benefit both the credibility and the visibility of the scholarship tax credit. If you drive around in Arizona in December, virtually every public school marquee that you see has a sign that says, "Remember your tax credit donation." And that has obviously, in my opinion, helped increase donations to the scholarship tax credit as well. But when the law was enacted in 1997, it was immediately challenged, of course. by the normal opponents of school choice, which included the Arizona Education Association, the ACLU, the Arizona School Boards Association, and the People for the American Way. And the Arizona Supreme Court on that occasion took direct jurisdiction of that case, and 18 months later rendered a decision in a case called Cotterman v. Killian, which upheld the constitutionality of the individual scholarship tax credit on a 3-2 vote with an opinion written by then Vice Chief Justice Thomas Dulackett. Today, however, more than 10 years later, we're still fully engaged in litigation relative to the individual scholarship tax credit that is now being pursued by the ACLU, and there's a case pending in the United States Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That case is now known as Wynn v. Garriott. It's been argued, and we're anticipating a decision later this year. Given the makeup of the panel, which was probably the worst imaginable in the entire United States, we're anticipating the necessity to ultimately have to ask for an en banc review by the entire Ninth Circuit, and then probably ultimately an appeal to the United States Supreme Court. The original version of the Arizona Scholarship Tax Credit provided for a maximum donation of $500 by both an individual taxpayer or a married taxpayer filing jointly. That was increased from $500 to $625 as a provisional enactment that was connected to a referendum to increase the sales tax to fund public schools. Then in 2005, an important piece of legislation passed in Arizona. We called it the Marriage Penalty Elimination Bill, and it was sponsored by then State Senator Dean Martin, who's now our state treasurer, and myself in the House, and it passed comfortably in both houses. We merged that bill with what we call in Arizona the IRS conformity bill, and what it did, it increased the amount that a married couple could donate first to $825 and then to $1,000, such that a married couple is now eligible in Arizona to donate twice as much as a single taxpayer. As you can see from the handout that I provided you regarding the history of the Arizona Individual Scholarship Tax Credit, there are several years where you will note some significant increases in total donations. The first such increase was back in 1999, which of course coincides with the Arizona Supreme Court upholding the constitutionality of the credit. And then the total donations jumped by $7 million from 2000 to 2001. Then they jumped by $11 million from 2004 to 2005, and then another $9 million between 2005 and 2006. And all of those significant increases actually coordinate with the increase in the amount that married couples could donate. And as long as you're looking at the handout, you'll also note that the number of STOs, we call them that, school tuition organizations, grew steadily for the first 5 years until now it's leveled off at the current 55. The total number of donations has grown every year, up to the 76,000 individual donors last year, and total dollars donated have also grown every year to the $54 million that was donated in 2007. On the implementation side, the number of scholarships being given each year has also grown to the current 27,000 plus, and the average scholarship has grown every year except 2001 to its current level now of $1,788. Now, it's significant to note that there are presently about 50,000 private school students in Arizona. That means that approximately 1/2 of all private school students in the state of Arizona are receiving some scholarship pursuant to the Individual Scholarship Tax Credit Program. On a personal note, I joined the House of Representatives in 2003, and I joined quickly the struggle to create a corporate scholarship tax credit to accompany the individual scholarship tax credit. In 2003, that bill failed in the House but passed the Senate. In 2004, I sponsored it and it passed the House but not the Senate. In 2005, it passed both, and the governor agreed to sign the bill, and then she reneged on her promise and vetoed it after the legislature had adjourned. Well, in response to that action, in 2006, the corporate scholarship tax credit was the very first bill sent to the governor's desk, and she promptly vetoed it again. Subsequently, it was passed once again, and then passed again, and the second time the cap was increased from the proposed $5 million per year to $10 million per year, and it ultimately then became law without the governor's signature. Of course, the law was promptly challenged in court by all of the same crew of school choice opponents that I mentioned before. However, this time the Arizona Supreme Court chose not to take direct jurisdiction and sent the case back for being processed in the normal fashion. So far, the Arizona Superior Court in Maricopa County has dismissed the case against the corporate scholarship tax credit, and that is now on appeal to the State Court of Appeals, and will probably go ultimately to the Arizona Supreme Court perhaps as well. The second handout I've given you is the brief history of the Arizona Corporate Scholarship Tax Credit. In its first partial year, the credit was in existence. $7.4 million of the possible $10 million was donated. However, in the current 2007-2008 fiscal year, the $12 million statewide cap was reached in mid-December, and I estimate that there are probably about 2,500 students who've been scholarshiped as a result of those particular donations. We'll know those actual numbers later this month when a report is due to the Arizona Department of Revenue. Next year, the maximum amount that can be awarded statewide automatically increases to $14.4 million, and then it continues to increase by 20% every year until the built-in repeal of the program, which is scheduled for 2011. I'm presently working to eliminate that built-in repeal, and that, however, may require several attempts, just as did the original creation of the Corporate Scholarship Tax Credit Program. The Corporate Scholarship Tax Credit has several restrictions that do not appear in the individual scholarship tax credit. Among those, the recipients of those scholarships must be what I call switchers, that is, students who are leaving a public school or entering kindergarten and going to a private school. Their family income cannot exceed 185% of the reduced price lunch eligibility standard, which is approximately 3.4 times the poverty level. The scholarships each have maximums, one for K through 8, another for 9 through 12. The schools are required to fingerprint those who work directly with students, and then the school must give and publish a national norm reference test. And finally, the STO must provide an annual independent CPA review. I will mention just briefly in passing that the two voucher programs that were enacted in Arizona in 2006, one serving disabled students and one serving students out of foster care, have been recently declared unconstitutional pursuant to Arizona's version of the Blaine Amendment. That was done by an intermediate court of appeals, and that decision is presently being appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court, which in my view, the appeal has considerable merit. I should always note in these circumstances that I'm employed actually as the executive director of the Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization, which is the largest STO in Arizona in terms of both scholarships awarded and dollars received in donations, and that was a position I held before I ran for the legislature. So I've worked on this issue from both the public policy side and from the practical implementation side. Arizona also has a vibrant association of the STOs. About 40% of the STOs are active in that association. However, the STOs that are involved, even though only 40% of the total, they represent over 90% of the dollars actually donated and of the scholarships awarded. I do commend to you Adam Schaefer's recent article, if you may have seen that, School Choices, Ace in the Hole, and that provides a great discussion of scholarship tax credit and the value of the STOs. So my summary of lessons to be learned from Arizona would include the following. You need passionate citizens and committed legislators from the beginning. And fortunately today there are many groups and experts available to you who were not available to us, frankly, 10 or even 5 years ago, and they are fabulous and much appreciated. Alliance for School Choice being at the top of my list. You need to identify in this whole process a few relentless, persistent legislative champions, and if necessary, you need to go out and recruit people to run who will be those for you. I would suggest that the pro-school choice community, once a program is in place, should do as you've done in Florida, and that is instantly begin aggressively pressing for expansion of the programs. As you have seen, the Arizona maximum donation for the individual scholarship tax credit has been increased 3 times, and we added the corporate scholarship tax credit during the 10 years that we've been in this process. I always suggest that you keep the legislation as simple as possible and that you strive to minimize the government entanglement in the process. And finally, once you have a program, organize those who are engaged in the implementation of the program in an effort to give you another voice that is both hopefully persuasive and effective in increasing those programs. And I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Steve. We've heard from legislative and implementation champions in Florida and Arizona. We're now going to turn to our next two panelists who are from the think tank community. We'll start off with Matt Ladner.
Great. Thanks for having me here. I kind of want to pick up where John left off in a couple of different ways, but first of all, his complaining about the Florida press, I'd like to echo some of that. Recently, I've been looking into NAEP scores and the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is, the national, more or less the United States Department of Education gives these tests to samples of students, representative samples of students in all 50 states, right? I started looking in detail about the scores here in Florida and the remarkable improvement that you see in the most critical of these tests, which is fourth grade reading, okay? I discovered, and I was writing for the Goldwater Institute, and I found, wow, you know what? In fourth grade reading, Hispanic students in Florida outscore the statewide averages for all students in 15 different states, okay, including my home state of Arizona, California. They miss, actually, they barely miss a state like Oregon, which is, kind of extraordinary if you've been to Oregon. And so I had a lot of people, sort of email me and say, well, Ladner, oh, gosh, you don't understand. Florida's different. Hispanics in Florida, they're Cuban, you see, and Cubans are rich Republicans. I said, I was emailing with these people, and it's like, it's funny, my grandfather used to own a house in the Keys, and, rich Republicans are not the words I would describe, it's just not true, right? And as, and I would email with these people, and I would say, and strange, too, that the African-American trend is exactly the same, right? You see it from 1998 to 2007, just pew, right? African-Americans in Florida, fourth grade reading, outscore the statewide averages for all students in Louisiana, Mississippi, and they're about this far from overtaking several other of these same 15 states, including my own. But I kept getting this, it's different, blah, 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 right? So I said, okay, went into the numbers again. Free and reduced lunch eligible Hispanic students in Florida outscore the statewide average in Arizona and in several other states, including California. I thought, well, this is extraordinary. So I actually emailed, we did a column and we pitched every newspaper in the state of Florida. We're like, you've had this phenomenal success, right? Demographics is destiny, right? No, not so much, right? One newspaper in the state that was interested in running this column, just one.
Probably the same one that editorials is a favorite school choice.
Probably so, yeah. I mean, what you're doing in the state is extraordinary. You're really a beacon and a light to the rest of us, so keep it up. It's really, you just don't see things like this in social science very often. The trend lines are flat, 1998 starts going up. Something I haven't published yet actually found that, you can go into the data and say not only free and reduced lunch kids, okay, you can actually narrow it down to say free lunch eligible children, okay. Free lunch eligible children, maximum income for a family of four is $20,650, okay. Free lunch eligible children in Florida score higher on fourth grade reading than the average score in my home state of Arizona, okay. This is extraordinary. It's revolutionary. And what you guys are doing is just so impressive, and so I want to thank all of you who are involved in this. John raised 3 points, 3 questions about what it is that we should want out of our school choice programs, right? He said that we could have the goal of keeping financially struggling kids in private schools, right? He said we could have the goal of ending what I think he referred to it as double payment bias. Right. This is the problem that you have to pay your public school taxes, and then in addition, if you put your child in private school, you're paying tuition as well, okay? And third, can we help low-income kids attend private schools that otherwise would not have the opportunity? My suggestion is that we need to do all three of these things. We don't really have programs yet that do all three of these things. Different programs are accomplishing different parts of these goals. The scholarship, the Step Up for Students program in this state is clearly helping low-income kids get the opportunity to go to private schools, and that's a very good thing. Our corporate tax credit in Arizona is more aimed at doing that goal, okay? But it's also very important to keep financially struggling children in the private schools that they're attending. That's a laudable and important goal as well. And recently, I had the chance to look into this. There was an article that came out in the journal Education Next, and it sort of posed the question, are charter schools going to be the death knell of inner-city Catholic schools, right? This is an extremely alarming article if you're a school choice supporter, right? If you're a school choice supporter that supports both charter schools and private school choice, the last thing you want to see is, oh, by the way, charter schools are killing your private schools, right? But there was some evidence to support this. There was a RAND Corporation study from the state of Michigan that looked at the available evidence and data, and it suggested that for every 3 kids going into charter schools in Michigan, there was 1 kid coming out of the private schools. Okay, you do the math on that, but it doesn't add up. And in fact, if you examine Catholic school trends in Detroit, it's devastating. It's not the only thing going on. There's a lot of other problems that inner-city Catholic schools have. The parishioners have moved out to the suburbs. They no longer have the availability of religious staff to the degree they did. But this is sort of not the straw, but maybe the bale of hay that's going to break the camel's back. So this was extremely alarming. So I began to dig into the data in Arizona, right? Arizona is very different than Michigan, obviously. We have a growing population instead of a sort of a flat or slightly declining K-12 population. We do have, of course, a very booming Hispanic population, which are predominantly Catholic, so that plays a role. But another big thing is that we have our scholarship tax credit program, which, as you saw, raised $54 million last year. In addition to that, we more recently have the corporate credit. So I started digging around, like, what are Catholic school trends doing in Arizona? And quite frankly, the answer is Catholic education is booming in Arizona. We're not, you have a national trend of decline, right? Unfortunately, this national trend of Catholic schools, especially in inner city areas, are closing. In Michigan, there's been 29 Catholic school closures in the last 5 years, or something very similar to that, okay? You start digging into Arizona, you see the experiences is just the opposite, okay? We have new Catholic schools opening up in Maricopa County, right, defying this national trend. And not only that, our inner city Catholic schools, the schools in Phoenix, every last one of them is either in the midst of a capital campaign or has just completed a capital campaign to expand, okay? I called the superintendent of Catholic schools in Arizona and I said, how much of a difference does the tax credit program make? She says it's a tremendous difference. She said the bottom line is that this program gives us a source of funds that we can use when we have students who are financially struggling, whose parents just can't afford to keep them there anymore, right? We have some money that we can use to help them. And that makes a huge difference over time in the kind of enrollment trends you see. So that's ultimately a very important goal. I mean, it's a tragedy around the country to watch inner city Catholic schools disappear. Often these have been the only highest quality school options in their areas for decades, right? And yet these schools are disappearing. So that's an important policy goal. And then, of course, to help low-income kids go to private school, this is the most important policy goal in my view, okay? We can do all of these things. We don't yet have a program that really attacks all of these problems at the same time. But we can get there. The sort of ultimate goal, and I think Andrew will probably talk about this, so I'll let him do that. The ultimate goal ought to have a combination of both scholarship credits, right, donation credits that are means tested, coupled with a significant personal use tax credit. Personal use tax credit being, I put my child into a private school, I get, a credit against my state, probably income tax. Depending on your tax system, it might get very complicated. But if you combine these two things, right, or we means test the scholarship credit and provide a personal use tax credit, we could have a universal system of school choice. Everyone is eligible for it, but it could have an advantage for the poor, which is something that I support. So we haven't got there yet. The sort of, we're more or less, making this up as we go around the country, right? We're experimenting with different programs. We've had good success in expanding the ones we have. We haven't got anything that's close to the gold standard yet, but we're working on it, and I encourage you to continue striving for that. Thank you.
Our final panelist is going to be Andrew Colson from the Cato Institute in D.C.
Well, yesterday I was in a brief meeting with Governor Bush, and he came up with a statistic that really kind of surprised me and I think throws a bit of a curveball in our direction trying to promote school choice. He said that every year that he was governor of Florida, education was the #1 priority that poll respondents would give when they were asked in an election cycle, what's your most important policy issue? What do you care most about? The most often #1 answer, most common #1 answer was education. And that's not totally unusual for other states, but it was even more important in Florida, more consistently important in Florida than elsewhere. He said that the most recent figures that came out, education has dropped not to second or even third place. I think it might be in fourth place now. 50% of people said their #1 concern was the economy, and then foreign policy was a second after that. And so how do you pitch educational freedom when you still value it for the same reasons, but now everyone is concerned about balancing the budget? Well, one thing you can do is point out that you can save huge amounts of money at the same time as spreading educational freedom. So last December, the Cato Institute came out with a model education tax credit program that does just what Matt was describing at the end of his talk. It combines scholarship programs like you have in Florida and in Arizona with personal use tax credits like they have in Illinois. Of course, it actually makes these programs offer a larger benefit for each individual child so that really you enable pretty much anyone who becomes eligible for this program to attend the public or private school of their choice. And we called this the Public Education Tax Credit Act, which confused a lot of people at first. This is for private schools. And it gives us a great opportunity to explain to people there's a difference between public education and public schooling. Public education is a set of ideals. It's the ideal that we want every child to have access to good schools, that we want schools not just to prepare kids for success in private life and become financially independent, but also to participate in public life. And that we want our schools to foster harmonious relations between different religious and ethnic groups in our country. We don't want them being a source of conflict. These ideals of public education you get virtually 100% agreement on in polling. But those ideals are a completely separate beast from the institution of public schooling. Public schooling is a particular way to get to that end. It's just a tool, and it just happens to be the wrong tool for the job. In fact, having studied school systems from ancient times to the present over the past 15 years, it is one of the worst tools for the job that it has ever been designed. So instead, we're proposing this public education tax credit, which would let people choose a public or private school for their children, and is very well supported in the literature. And I gave a presentation yesterday on the evidence for market approaches to education versus monopoly approaches, and of course markets come out on top. So this program gives credits for parents' own educational expenses, credits for scholarship donations like you have in Florida. It's applicable not just to state-level taxes and not just to state income taxes, but to local property taxes, to sales taxes, whatever pool of taxes the legislature decides is appropriate for that state, and thus it opens up a lot more revenue for credits, can become viable in pretty much any state. The other thing that this bill does, which is different from, I think, every scholarship program that exists today is that the cap, which you basically need in order to ensure fiscal responsibility, the cap on the amount of money that can be donated is not an aggregate cap. It's not total donations from all businesses and individuals can be $100 million. It's no particular child can get more than a certain benefit. And if you cap it at the individual child level, then no matter how many kids migrate, you're still going to be fiscally responsible as long as the total amount of the credits is less than what you're spending in public schools. Well, it turns out that that's pretty easy to do because public schools spend a lot more on average than private schools do. In Florida, I calculated the numbers recently. For the current year, total per pupil spending is close to $13,000 in this state. You never hear a number even close to that because most of the numbers that are reported don't include capital costs for building upgrades and construction and land acquisition, and sometimes they won't include federal funding. But if you include all the spending in public schools, which you really need to do, they're spending way, way more than private schools are. So how do you figure out what the fiscal impact of a program like this is going to be? It's easiest to divide it up between the state level and the district level. The state level, it's pretty trivial. When a child moves from a public school to a private school, the state no longer has to send their appropriation for that student to the district. So the state saves whatever their per pupil appropriation is when a child migrates from public to private school. Of course, if credits are claimed against state taxes, say against the state sales tax, then you're going to lose revenue at the state level. So you have to offset these two things, take them both into account. At the district level, alas, things get a little more complicated, and I'll try not to bore you with the gory details, but when a kid leaves a public school, the public school does not save 100% of their per pupil allocation. So if it's $13,000 or so in Florida, the district does not save $13,000 when a single child moves because, for instance, you still have to run your air conditioners in Florida if you don't want to kill all these poor kids with humidity and heat. And you still have to run those air conditioners, cost you just as much to do that if there's one fewer kid in the class. So what you really save is what's called by economists the marginal cost. It's the cost of everything that actually does go away with the loss of a student. You can begin to reduce your teaching workforce. You can make class sizes larger and reorganize your classes. And economists have ways of figuring out what this marginal cost is. And so basically, once you've calculated it, you say, this is how much is saved when a child leaves the public schools in favor of a private school. Then you have to offset tax credits that are made against local taxes. So if a family claims a $2,000 property tax credit, that's $2,000 in revenue that the school district isn't going to get. And also, of course, the state appropriation is no longer coming for a student who's migrated, so you have to take that into account. That's most of the picture, but then there's still the real Achilles heel of a lot of school choice programs, which is that there are already, on average, about 10% of all students enrolled in the private sector. So if, right from the get-go, you allow every child currently enrolled in the private sector to claim a credit, before there has been much migration out of public schools and into private schools to generate savings, you're going to be in the red right away. And so what a lot of states have done, what Florida did, was say you can't have been in a private school in the previous year or some period of time. Other states have different periods of time in order to be eligible. So it has to be only for kids who were currently in public schools. What we did with our model legislation, because we're aiming for a universal program, is just to say, well, yes, for fiscal neutrality, you probably want to phase this in over time, but you can do that. You can just phase it in over a number of years, say by grade. You know, people who are in private schools in K through 2 in the first year are eligible to claim a credit, and then in the next year it's K through 4, and you just add years until you, at the end of some period of time, allow anybody who was in a private school to claim the credit. When you do this, you save a lot of money. I was just in Chicago last week presenting these figures, and people were pretty impressed, but when you look at the first few years, it's kind of small because we made a pretty conservative estimate for how fast people would migrate from public to private schools when they got these credits, when private schooling became more affordable. So in the first few years, you're saving a few $100 million, which is nice. You know, $100 million here, $100 million there. Pretty soon it adds up to real money. Well, after 15 years, the amount of migration out of the public schools, which are very expensive in Illinois as well, leads you to be saving $1.6 billion every year. And that's not actually the limit. With the total predicted migration, which we expect to happen, which would come after about 20 years or so, Illinois would be saving $1.8 billion a year. This is really, really big savings. And in other states, the numbers are even higher. New York and Texas spend a great deal on their public schools, and they also are very large states. So just in the first 10 years of their programs, we found that they would save on the order of $15 billion. The next 10 years, they'd save much, much more. By the second decade of this program, I think we found that Texas would be saving on the order of $40 billion over that 10-year period. And this really isn't that hard to understand when you find that big city districts in these big states often spend upwards of $20,000 per pupil. I ran the numbers on Washington, D.C. recently, found they're spending $24,600 per pupil in total. The numbers are just astronomical, and so it's easy to realize savings. What about Florida? Unfortunately, we haven't yet got the marginal cost number for Florida, so we haven't been able to run the numbers on this state. I have a rough preliminary estimate, and it looks like Florida would also be in the billion-dollar savings after a few years of migration of kids to private schools. So there's real potential in this state for the expansion of school choice to be sold not just on the grounds that parents need this, kids need this, but also that taxpayers need it. If you want to balance your budget and you're looking for a way to do it, why not? So saving money is nice, but obviously saving kids is essential. Florida has made, as Matt pointed out, some tremendous progress at the fourth grade level. But the most recent statistics that I've seen for graduation rates place it around 7th from last in the country. And so huge numbers of kids are never graduating from high school in this state. And what that does to their future, everybody in this room knows. I mean, your prospects for making a good living are just dashed by not having a high school diploma. And so when you look at the effects of school choice, one of them is much, much higher attainment. They're by which I mean much higher graduation rates. In Milwaukee, for instance, there's very significant evidence now that the kids who are getting vouchers to attend private schools have much higher graduation rates than similar kids who are staying behind in the public schools. There was another study that was done nationally that found African American kids, especially in urban areas, had much higher graduation rates in private Catholic schools than they did in public schools. So this is a really important thing to do for a lot of reasons, and we need to emphasize all of those reasons in making the case. Thanks very much.
We have about 15 minutes for questions, and I thought I'd start off with the first one. I'm going to ask Andrew a question, and then we'll take some other questions from the floor. Wanted to make sure that I understood some of the nuances of the bill. Our current individual and corporate tax credit programs predominantly in all these locations benefit low-income kids. But low-income families don't tend to have much, if any, of a tax liability to then get the credit for. So I was trying to figure out, at the very end, you had a combination of personal and donation tax credits could work. So I thought maybe if you could address a little bit about who you see as the beneficiaries of your model tax legislation and how you would make sure that low-income families in particular are addressed through a tax credit, maybe multi-type of tax credit scheme in the state.
Basically, the scholarship aspect of the program is the one that's aimed for lower income children whose families are not going to have much of a tax liability. So just as in other states, the scholarships are intended primarily to serve lower income families, but even a middle income family that has, say, 3 kids and therefore 3 tuition bills would be eligible to a lesser extent for the scholarships under this program. And what we've done is to try to avoid a problem that I've heard recently has actually been happening in Florida, where a family, for one reason or another, crests that income threshold and suddenly has just dropped off eligibility for the program. And so rather than having a harsh cutoff, if you cross this number, this single number by $1, you are out of the program, we have it phased out over a period of income growth. So if you started off in the program and you are at the free and reduced price lunch income level, then you get the maximum size of credit. But if your income goes up, it's gradually, the size of credit you're eligible for is gradually reduced. So nobody is just nobody has the plug pulled on them all of a sudden throwing their kids out of private schools and into public schools. And the other thing I would point out too is that if the goal, even for people for whom the goal of school choice is just to help low-income families, and there are people who have that goal in the school choice movement, it is still best to advocate universal school choice programs. And the reason is that the way markets work is that the more competition you have and the more options consumers have, the better everything works. The more efficiency you get, the more innovation, the more choices. And so when you have these tiny targeted programs that are only, for which only a small number of people are eligible, you get less of everything that markets can do. So a larger program is going to help low-income families more, just as it will help everyone else more. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Bob.
Oh, okay. This is a question for Matt, I guess, and Andrew also. You had talked about having, let's say, multiple purpose tax credit laws, and I agree that you need to have that. One thing that Andrew didn't mention is constituency. How are you going to get a suburban family to vote for the bill if you don't have a direct tax credit? My question is, you're talking about this using a lot of different options. I'm kind of disappointed that the voucher panel and the tax credit panel are at the same time. I mean, what? I mean, the bill that I want to pass in Texas has both in it. So anyway, it frustrates me that it's like the tax credit people are arguing with the voucher people, and it's like, have both. What's the big deal? Anyway.
I completely agree with you. I think that unfortunately there are advantages that tax credits have, and there are also advantages vouchers have. And my reaction to should we have vouchers or tax credits is yes, please. We'll have all the above, right? So I agree with you. And you're right. The suburban complacency is a problem. You know, it is. And I think that a personal use tax credit actually is a good way to address it.
I was just going to add, from the perspective of the Alliance for School Choice, we believe it's very much a state specific context to figure out what bill design will work best in your state. Between looking at the makeup of your legislatures, the makeup of your committee chairman, how is this going to, the politics, the grassroots mobilization. I mean, there's a whole factor of issues. So we actually advise on both vouchers and tax credits, and we have some states that have both. Florida being one, because they've got the McKay Scholarship Program, which is a voucher for special needs children. So there's a number of varieties of programs that are out there, and increasingly we're finding that it really doesn't matter which order a state chooses. Some states have started off with tax credits and then moved on to some form of a voucher program, or vice versa. But we've increasingly found that states are realizing that universal is hard, if not impossible, to achieve out of the get-go, and there's going to be a variety of programs that are going to benefit different types of students that are, in school choice-friendly states that are going to increasingly build up the culture of school choice, as in Florida.
Yeah, I would just add that I would love to have had the sessions be in series rather than in parallel. Like, it's much more interesting. I do disagree that the choice of a program, voucher, tax credit, or alternative charter schools, should be primarily done based on what seems to be most conducive to passage in a state, or that should be the dominant consideration. I think there are real differences functionally in these programs. Sometimes right from the beginning, sometimes only in the long term. And if we don't think about the ramifications of these long-term ramifications of the different kinds of programs, we could get successes which turn out to be pyrrhic victories in the long term. So bill design is really important.
One comment, Charles?
Oh, sure. No problem, Steve.
Just briefly on that, there are also litigation concerns that are obviously very serious. Some of us, like myself, are radical supporters of both of these programs, but with the voucher, we have some other hurdles that we have to try to get over.
Lori.
Well, my question is for John mostly, but for everyone else who wants to join in. And one thing in Florida, as I understand it, there's no minimum scholarship requirement for the scholarship organizations to dole out. Yet, Florida is consistently a higher scholarship amount for the families who are participating, allowing for more families to participate in a more meaningful way of actually moving kids from public school to private school. So my question is, was that an internal decision to make sure that those were the levels of scholarships that you wanted to be doling out, or is that something that has just kind of naturally happened in Florida, whereas it hasn't naturally happened in Arizona, recognizing that the individual program in Arizona is not for low-income families specifically. But I just wanted to kind of understand a little bit more of that debate internally between the two states.
Sure. We didn't make an internal policy decision at our scholarship fund, nor did the ones that I work with, to have a minimum scholarship amount. It was a natural outgrowth, I think, of the design of the bill, which said you cannot already be in private school and get the scholarship, which of course was done for budgetary reasons. As I mentioned earlier, you have to either be transferring from public to private or entering kindergarten or first grade in order to get our scholarship. And because of that fact, you're going to, just by design, get very few instances where a school is coming to you saying, hey, you have no instances where they come to you and say, we have somebody who's already here that just needs a little bit to stay here because they're not eligible by law. So just the design of the bill just brought us naturally all these brand new entrants to private schools, whether they be coming in kindergarten or first grade or transferring over from public or private. And so when they're brand new and their average incomes are $24,000, of course they're going to try to get the most scholarship that they can. When the average tuition is $5,000, you're going to get $5,000 if you can, but in our case you can only get $4,000.
Just as a quick aside, are you experiencing the closures in Florida, the school closures in Florida that other states are
Yes,
experiencing?
yes. There have been, in the last year, to my knowledge, there were 3 outstanding Catholic schools that closed. I can think of one in Miami and a couple in the Panhandle, and it's for the very reasons that we've all talked about today.
We had a question right here, I believe, or do you still have it?
I do.
Okay.
Hold on just a second, I'll give you mine.
Hello, I'm a parent advocate in Florida, and I'm one of those Democrats for school choice. My husband is a Democrat also, but he's a blue-collar, card-carrying union guy, but he loves school choice. So for that reason, I volunteer on campaigns sometimes that are Republicans. And he goes, are you a Republican? So we have that conversation. But I find a lot of my friends are, just like me. And I'm trying to find out, I appreciate the information you gave today, Mr. Kirtley, about explaining the hostile environment that Florida is in, especially with the press and with Democrats, et cetera, et cetera. But do you see any room for mobilizing marginal constituents like myself for the school choice movement?
Absolutely, and we're doing it. And what I just showed you is evidence of its success. Just this year, we got a majority of the Black Caucus, only one of which is a Republican, by the way, to vote for the bill. And I think, and you talk about mobilization, 4,500 people came to the Capitol last year to show how they feel about this. It is happening. And I believe that we have reached a tipping point, to use a cliche, and I don't think we're going to go backwards. And I think it's going to be very difficult for Democrats, and let me make a distinction. It's going to be very difficult for Democrats who represent low-income communities to continue to oppose what their constituents want so very badly. Now, if you're a white Democrat in Weston, which, by the way, for those you don't know, is a part of Broward that's very affluent, sure, you can oppose this because you don't stand any chance for retribution. But there's a state senator here in Orlando that has 2,600 kids on the tax credit program in his own district. They go to 80 schools, many of whom are run by prominent ministers in his district. If you oppose this, you take a big chance because he won his primary the last time around with probably about 10,000 votes. You get 2,600 kids. They all have at least one parent, sometimes two. They have a grandparent, an aunt, people who care about this very much. You start adding that up, you get pretty close to 10,000 votes. And it's just a matter of getting it done, getting it mobilized.
What about expansion of the program? How can that be included in Florida, like the income? I have 4 children in private school.
Mm-hmm. So you would like to increase the level of income where people can be eligible. Is that right? It's just a matter of pushing the ball forward. And I think if we have more votes like we had this spring, where 1/3 of all Democrats in the legislature voted for an increase in this program as it's structured, how much more difficult can it be to raise the income level maybe 10–20%? And we can certainly eliminate what Andrew was talking about, which is where you make $1 over the limit and you lose the scholarship. That's just perverse.
We have time for one more question, and then I'm going to just play a very short video to close us out right there.
The administrative fees seem to vary. I guess it's from about 20% to 0 that states can withhold, or the scholarship organizations can withhold. What is the rationale for that, and have the think tanks done anything to show what should be withheld? We tend to think I'm from Georgia, and we have the 90%, but our governor's wondering, well, why can't it be 100% like Florida, and is that working in Florida?
Yeah, I think there's a consensus that that there should be an administrative allowance. And the fact this is a part of the historic victory that you've just had here in Florida is not only did the cap get raised $30 million, there was also a 3% administrative allowance put in. The Pennsylvania credit has up to a 20% allowance, but the actual use, the actual groups only use 7%. It's 10% in Arizona. Somewhere between 7 and 10%. 3 if you're already big, like you were here in Florida. 3% of a bigger base, gets you enough money to operate. So, but there should be an administrative allowance, but anything over 10% is probably too much.
It's partly a political question. A 10% allowance would not politically survive in Florida, in our environment. That's just the bottom line.
Okay. I want to thank the panelists. Before we close, I want to show a quick 3-minute video helping us, I think, get back to what's really important, that we're here to help kids, and that this is these are policies that are demanded by the low-income parents in our states, and that it's just a powerful reminder of the importance of school choice, to expand options, to put parents back in charge.
From Miami to Pensacola, from Jacksonville to Tallahassee, from Central Florida and all points spanning our wonderful topography, we've come. We are indeed many faces, but one dream. We have one dream of a quality educational opportunity for even the poorest of our children. We will not accept a system that champions choice by privilege of the rich, and at the same time perpetuate systemic prohibition of choice for the poor.
I can assure you that 4,000 faces will not be ignored today in Tallahassee. Parents have come to me looking for the power to do what is right for all our children right now. We simply want to find the best school for our kids. Parental choice of education should not be a partisan issue. It should not be decided based on whether you are a Democrat or you're a Republican. Parental choice should be decided on what is the best education for your children. We graduate less than 50% of minority children in Florida. If you're a black male, African-American male, your choices are 38%.
And ladies and gentlemen, today we certainly welcome this gentleman who is a civil rights legend. At the risk of death, he articulated and fought for equal justice under the law. He was jailed more